Hey there everyone, Mr. Lewis here again, ready to go through section 2.4 today. So section 2.3 from yesterday was elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, how demand responds to changes in price. Today is section 2.4, price elasticity of supply. So it's a lot of the same stuff, but the reason this video is so short today is because I'm assuming you've watched the lecture from yesterday. So if you weren't there for it or you didn't view it yesterday, please go back and watch the section 2.3 lecture from yesterday. It's in yesterday's agenda. It's also in the course notes, the Google Slides that are linked in today's agenda up above there. So make sure you view that. And if you have, you're ready to rock and we'll get into 2.4. So let's do it. Okay, so section 2.4, price elasticity of supply. So before this, let's think about how we've gotten to this point. We talked about 2.1 and 2.2, supply and demand, and then we put those two together to create a market. And we know that as the price changes, quantity demanded changes in one way and quantity supplied changes in another way. Those are our laws of demand and supply. But what it doesn't tell us is how much do they change? Because the thing is, if I increase my price by, let's say, 400%, which is a lot, and I only lose like 2% of my customers, that's a good decision. But if increasing my price by 10% loses me 70% of my customers, that's a dumb decision. So these help us make better, more accurate decisions when it comes to supply and demand. It also allows us, elasticity allows us to analyze consumers and producers on a much deeper level. So today we're looking at the supply side of this equation. Yesterday we talked about elasticity of demand. Today is elasticity of supply. Price elasticity of supply is just what we talked about yesterday, but flipped over to the supply side. So it's a measure of producer, not consumer, but producer responsiveness to changes in price. So the law of supply tells us that as price goes up, the quantity supplied will go up as well, but it doesn't tell us by how much it'll increase, right? So that's where elasticity of supply comes in. We are comparing the percentage change in quantity supplied to the percentage change in price. And as we've discussed before, a comparison is just a ratio, and a ratio is just a division problem. So for us, whenever we're doing elasticity, whether it's quantity demanded or quantity supplied, quantity goes in the numerator on top of the fraction. Okay, it's the first part of our ratio. What we're comparing it to in the denominator is always going to be the price, or in other words, dollars go in the denominator. So make sure you are always remembering to put dollars down and quantity on top. Otherwise, your answer will be, quite frankly, exactly the opposite of what you want. You know, it's nice that it's such an easy sort of problem. It's just a simple division problem. But if you flip it, obviously that's one mistake that'll steer you toward the wrong answer. So be very careful with that. With elastic supply and inelastic supply, it's just like we talked about with demand. Elastic supply if it's greater than 1, inelastic if it's less than 1. So if quantity is changing by just a little bit, even as price changes by a lot, in other words, if our numerator is less than our denominator, elasticity is less than 1. Producers are very fixed, right? They're not very responsive to changes in price. On the other hand, if we have elastic producers, it means they're highly responsive to changes in price. So even if that price only changes by a little, quantity supplied could change by a lot, meaning our numerator is greater than our denominator and our elasticity value is greater than 1, which makes it elastic. Now, all of that stuff we discussed yesterday. This shouldn't be news. Where it gets a little different is why producers are more responsive. We talked about it yesterday with consumers, right? Consumers want things or need things really bad, or there might be something that we don't want at all. Well, it's different with producers. Okay, now just to make sure before we move on to the conceptual side of this, to make sure we understand what we're doing with calculating price elasticity of supply, here is another example. There were a couple about demand yesterday. Here's one for supply. So what I would do if I were you right now watching this is I would take a second, pause this video, and then try to work out this equation, and then continue the video and see if you can get it right. What I'm going to do right now is just continue on. So our elasticity formula is percentage change in QS over percentage change in price. In this case, the quantity goes from 10 to 15 when the price goes from 4 to 5. So to get percent change, we're just going to do the change in the value. In this case, we're talking about quantity because that's our numerator. So up here, we're doing a change of 10 to 15 or 5 divided by the original 10 gives us 0.5. Down here in the denominator, we're doing the price change. So the change from $4 to $5 is 1 over the original 4 gives us 0.25. We can multiply each of those by 100% to get it to a percentage, and we would end up with 50 over 25%, which is going to give us 2.0. We would say that the price elasticity of supply for good X in this price range is 2.0, and that supply is relatively elastic because it's greater than 1. All right, so that's how we do that. Now let's just remind ourselves, the more vertically aligned the curve is, this is true with demand, it's just that we have a positively sloped curve instead of a negatively sloped curve. When it's more vertical, it's inelastic. And I've calculated all that out here to show you that that value would be less than 1. Over here, it's more elastic. And again, I've calculated all this out for you using the numbers on the graph to show you that it would be greater than 1. So the more horizontal or elongated the curve is, the more elastic it is, right? Elongated, elastic. The more vertical it is, or the more it looks like a straight up and down, say, capital I, the more inelastic it is. So what's the significance here? Now that we have both of the curves on a graph and we can change up the elasticity based on the slope of the curve, we can actually start to assess various market outcomes, right? So in this case, the demand curves on each of these graphs are exactly the same. I think you can see that pretty well. So don't look at the supply curve, just look at these two demand curves. They're pretty much the same, right? They've got the same slope and they're moving the same direction. So on each graph, it is showing you an increase in demand. I know it's a little fuzzy, but just trust me. It's a rightward arrow. We're seeing an increase in demand. But over here, we have an inelastic supply curve, whereas over here, it's more elastic. And what you can see is that the changes in price and quantity as a result of the difference in elasticity are different. Here, price changes by a lot because supply is inelastic, right? So it's not like we're pouring a lot more into the market even though demand increased. So that demand is going to push the price really far up. Over here, not so much because supply has responded, right, to the demand increase. This supply was very quick to respond. So because they flushed more product into the market, that kept the price from drastically increasing like it did over here. This is important. So this would be more like the short run, meaning there's only so much firms can do in the short run to change their inputs. This would be more like the long run. What we mean by that is more like day-to-day versus years. In the day-to-day, the short run, there's not much you can change. You can't just set up a whole new factory in one day. So your inputs are going to be fixed, at least one of them. Okay, some of them might be variable, but there's going to be at least one fixed input, right? You can only do so much on a day-to-day basis. You can only change your input so much. So you're kind of inelastic. On the other hand, in the long run, you can do whatever you want. You can change a lot of things over the years. You can just completely double your factory and your operations, right? You can scale, as we say. You can grow. Well, you're more elastic in that sense. So you can respond to changes in the market demand or whatever. So in this case, we would say that inputs are variable. They can be changed. Or in other words, we're more elastic. So the main takeaways here, And this is the very last thing, and if you feel like you got a pretty good grip, you can tune out at this point. But price elasticity of supply measures the responsiveness of producers to price change, just like demand does. It's measured by comparing the percent change in quantity supplied to the percent change in price. It's just a comparison, it's just a ratio. Elasticity of greater than 1 is elastic, less than 1 inelastic, equal to 1 unitelastic. That's no news. Down here, this stuff is a little more important for our takeaways today. The general elasticity of supply kind of is given to us with the curve, right? Both on a demand curve with demand and a supply curve with supply. We can tell by the general upward angle or flat angle of that curve whether it's more inelastic or elastic. Because of that, the impact of a demand shift in the market is going to really vary, right? Whether it's on price or quantity, the inelasticity or the elasticity of the supply curve is going to change the impact of that demand shift. Finally, inputs can be more fixed or more variable. The supply curve kind of tells us that, right? If they're more inelastic, they're more fixed. Their inputs are pretty fixed. On the other hand, if you have a business that can easily scale and change, that's usually more elastic. You can respond. And that could suggest that we're in the short run if we have more fixed or inelastic supply, or if we're more in the long run and we have more variable or elastic supply. So, those are your main takeaways with this. Remember, we're going to review all this stuff as well. So if there's anything that's super unclear right now, when you come back into class, whether it's Thursday or Friday, we're going to go back over it. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at other types of elasticity. We're going to finish up with our couple other types of elasticity. And it's very similar to what we've been doing, but we got to wrap up a couple loose ends. And then we're going to do all of the elasticity stuff together. But no practice just yet. Thanks for watching today. That's it. Enjoy your Wednesday, you guys. So long.